welcome everyone. Welcome back. So if you haven't met me before, my name's Angie Schick. I manage the New Ventures BC competition and our other programs as well. So before we jump into the seminar today, this is my quick reminder that this is our last week for applications into the 2022 competition. So deadline is Monday, April 11th, 10 o'clock at night. You just need to complete an online form. So we have an info session online that goes over everything, but I always say don't spend too much time on the online form because it's an eligibility check. Save your time for the next round, which is when it gets serious. So just a reminder for that. Again, don't have to be in the competition to attend all these education workshops, but if you want to get some feedback on your company, go through the process, then I highly recommend it. Not that I'm biased or anything. All right, so we're here for the weekly startup seminar series. This week is on pricing for innovation, and we have a dream team with us from Ivika, who are all specialists in this. So taking you through the material, we have Rashaka Raman and Jesse Tai. And also for the Q&A, and also if you have any questions throughout, you can pop them in the chat. We also have Stephen Forth, who is one of the co-founders of Ivika. And between the three of them, you have pretty much all the knowledge you need for pricing. So definitely listen, come up with some questions, and I think the content is about an hour, and then we'll have a fair amount of time for Q&A. So definitely stick around for that. I'm just going to kind of go through a few things, thank my sponsors, and then I'm going to pass it over to Rashaka and Jesse. So we are on the second seminar of the series, lots more to go. So if you want to join us for a few more, all of them, that's kind of the list of topics coming up, and you can go to our website to sign up for more. Like I said, New Ventures BC, we're a nonprofit. I told you about the competition. Only other thing I'll mention is that we do have a sales accelerator program we're running right now with the Discovery Foundation. And these are for companies who have some revenue and are looking to improve your revenue model, scale, and really grow your sales. Very, very focused on sales and very tactical and company specific. So if this could be you, definitely check out our sales accelerator. Once I'm finished talking, I'll put all these links in the chat for you. I also like to just share some community events. If you have a community event that isn't listed here, go ahead and add it in the chat as well. These are just a few I noticed and updated recently. I'll point to a couple in that we hosted our first in 2 years networking event last week, and lots of fun. And the big thing was, well, where else can I go? Who else can I talk to? So I'll just point to a couple here. The Vancouver Tech Journal hosts super casual Friday afternoon drinks. You just show up, I think it's at Yaletown Brewing, and just meet who's there. And also April 28th, the Thai Angels, they do kind of a similar thing as well for networking. So those are kind of, there was noticing a big demand for networking. So those are kind of two, and then a bunch of other events here, and I'll link those up in a moment. So I'm going to thank my wonderful sponsors, who are the whole reason we get to do this, and then I'll pass it over to the Ivika team. So our lead partner title sponsor is Innovate BC. Our gold sponsors, EY, Baskin, SFU Beauty School of Business, and the UBC Sauder School of Business. Silver sponsors, Ace Tech, TELUS Ventures, Output, Vantech, and Volition. And our great bronze sponsors, who are all organizations here to support tech startups in the community here. Anything else? Oh, and media sponsors. And these organizations just help us get the word out about great startup stories. And that's it. Any questions? Reach out to me. You can reach me any of these ways. And other than that, I'm going to stop sharing. So Jesse and Rashaka can share their slides.
Sounds good.
Get going.
Okay, let me just set that up. Hopefully y'all can see my screen.
Yep, looks good.
Perfect. And thanks, Angie, for all that introduction. It's great to be back. And I'll let Rashaka do a small intro.
Great. Thank you, Jesse. Thank you, Angie. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are thrilled to be participating in the New Ventures BC Startup Seminar once again. We will be presenting to you an introduction to value-based methodologies, and this is an introductory level talk on pricing for early stage innovation. I would like to take a moment to introduce ourselves before we dive into today's presentation. So just to introduce our company first, Ibica is a software and data-enabled consultancy firm. We help organizations bring innovative solutions to market, segment their markets, choose target segments, develop pricing for those target segments, as well as develop the skills needed to succeed. We do this through AI-enabled platforms that connect value to price across the customer lifecycle and make sure that the people with the right skills are in place. The results Sorry, something jumped on my screen. Sorry. The result is, of course, a more successful innovation, faster revenue growth, higher profit, and better unit economics. That brings me to myself. I am Rashaka. I am a consultant at Ibica, and I specialize in value-based market segmentation research work and supporting the pricing design. I also support the development of our SaaS application, which we call the Value Pricing Dashboard, that helps companies execute on value-based pricing by quantifying and demonstrating the value that they deliver to their customers. My co-presenter today is my esteemed colleague, Jessie Tai, and we also have with us our CEO and co-founder, Stephen Forth, who will be taking questions via chat during the course of the presentation. And of course, he will be facilitating a Q&A after we go through our presentation today. Jessie and Stephen, if you would like to say a few words to introduce yourselves.
Yeah, sure. I guess I'll start it off. So hi, everyone. I'm Jessie Tai. I guess I've been at Ibica for about 7 years now. So started as an intern, moved my way up to consultant and analyst work, and now I am one of the lead project managers for the pricing engagement, but I also do some work in performance enablement. So work really closely with Stephen and Rashaka in terms of our value-based pricing, but a lot of work with segmentation as well as the market research that's involved with these pricing projects. Yeah, I'm just really excited to be back here presenting and talking about pricing for innovation. And Stephen, if you want to give a couple words just to introduce yourself. I think you're muted. We could also introduce Stephen for him as well. But he's one of our, as mentioned, one of our co-founders, really one of the spearheads in terms of pricing and innovation, does a lot of work and is quite involved in the community. So if folks have any questions regarding some of the slides that we're presenting today, feel free to drop questions in the chat. We'll keep our eyes on that, and hopefully we'll have time at the end for Q&A to answer those questions, and Stevens will help us out with those. So Rashaka, I'll probably move to the next slide.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Jessie. So early stage, right? Early stage is where, many aspects of your company may be incomplete. Management team may be lacking key individuals, product may still be in development, and or product is not yet on the market in a commercialized form, what we call beta. Also, if it is in fact commercially available, the product may not be only be generating revenues on a limited basis. You may have filed for patents for proprietary technologies. And at this stage, funding is typically transitioning from founders, friends and family, and you're looking to attract funds from accelerators, angels, and maybe VCs. So next slide, please. So at this stage, pricing plays a key role. How so? Warren Buffett once said that he only invests in companies that have pricing power. And pricing power is the ability to price without pushback. Pricing is central to how you communicate your value and position your offer. It starts with an in-depth understanding of value. And for us, when we talk about value, we talk about economic, emotional, and community aspects of the value, and we will be doing a deeper dive on that over the course of this presentation. Value-based market segmentation is the foundation of your pricing strategy. You need to be able to connect value to price, and all this leads to pricing power, and pricing power is so important to investors. And we will cover all of that during the course of our presentation today. So just to give you a quick idea of the agenda to come, we will start off with some framing principles, why pricing matters, fairness, consistency, and transparency in pricing. We will introduce you to the concept of value cycle, Following that, we will do a deep dive into understanding economic, emotional, and community value, which is foundational to value-based pricing. We will cover differentiation and segmentation, value-based market segmentation, that is. And once we have covered value, we will do a deep dive into some of the pricing core concepts. So basic frameworks, strategies, methods, models, pricing over the life cycle, as well as why pricing matters to investors. So in terms of the framing principles, next slide, please. Why does pricing matter, right? Pricing is where it all comes together, and it starts with understanding value, because without value, there is absolutely nothing to price. How you create value, who you create value for, who you sell to, how you communicate that value, and how you can capture a fair share of the value that you create through pricing. Pricing is incredibly powerful. At the end of the day, both you and your customer have to agree on a price. Next slide, please. So good value-based pricing should be perceived as fair, transparent, and consistent. So pricing must be perceived as fair. What do we mean by this? This means two things. Is the pricing proportional to the value being delivered? And secondly, are different stakeholders receiving and paying for value in a balanced way? What this means is, are you creating positive value for the buying organization as a whole? Because you won't be able to please every stakeholder, sometimes because of specific KPIs that they're responsible for, but the pricing should be perceived as fair by the buying organization as a whole, even if you can't get to every single stakeholder. In order for pricing to be perceived as fair, there must also be transparency. Do stakeholders, and by stakeholders we mean the buyer stakeholders, right? Do they understand why, how much, and when they will pay? Next is consistency. Pricing and value delivered needs to be consistent over the course of the customer engagement. The same pricing principles need to be applied to different market segments. If you're charging different prices for different segments, and that sometimes happens, and there isn't a value-based justification behind it, it leads to a negative perception. People tend to find out what others are paying, and nobody wants to come away thinking that they are paying more or they've been shortchanged in any way. So fairness, transparency, and consistency are foundational to good value-based pricing. So this brings us to the value cycle. Fairness, transparency, and consistency are a product of the value cycle. And the foundation of the value cycle is understanding of emotional, economic, and community value. Understanding the value that you create for your customer. So you create, so there are 5 spokes of the value cycle. You have to create value for the customer. You have to communicate the value that you're creating for them. So they need to know, they need to understand that the value that is being created for them. You need to deliver the value and document the value. So this spoke in the value cycle is extremely important. Confirmation is critical to making sure that the value is actually being delivered to all stakeholders. So documenting the value created ensures that you are delivering on the value promise. And only then can you capture through pricing a fair share of the value that you're creating for a customer. So the buyer stakeholders need to understand the connection between value capture, aka pricing, and the value that you create for them. You also need to price in a way such that you can commit to an ongoing value creation, and hence the value cycle. So you commit to creating value, and it is a cycle that goes on and on. Next slide, please. At this point in time, I will pass the talking stick over to Jesse to cover some of the core concepts around value, and I will circle back with the pricing concepts. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Rajaka. So as she mentioned, we said the term value a lot, and here at Ipika, we actually like to categorize and dig a bit deeper into what we mean by value instead of just saying it. So what I'll be covering is one of the key foundational topics being value drivers. So when we talk about value and pricing, we're really linking the pricing to the value and the building blocks of these value drivers. And as Rajaka mentioned, we did categorize value drivers into 3 categories, being economic, emotional, as well as community. And I'll expand on those in later slides. And another key component that was briefly mentioned was how value is really divided into two main components. So either it's differentiated or it's undifferentiated. And when we say undifferentiated, that can also mean just a commodity. And that really comes into play when we're thinking about pricing power. So before we go any further, I'll just step back and just talk about value as a concept. So I think it was mentioned quite heavily before that really value is key for pricing. And the reason why is because when we think about the foundational processes that we care about, so as mentioned here, market segmentation, value-based pricing, marketing strategy, and of course, value-based sales, all of these processes are connected. And we can even say that the connecting factor is value. And as Rashaka mentioned, without value, really, there's nothing to price. So that really asks the question of, okay, how can we identify and how can we quantify this value we speak of? And that's why we like to introduce these types of value drivers. And just to kind of define what value driver means, so really that is how a customer or potential customer may perceive value, and that's where we like to introduce these building blocks for our pricing work. So what I'll do next is introduce the 3 frameworks that Ibica has been using when we like to quantify and talk about value. So the first one that I'll mention is emotional value. And here I hope some folks are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs up the pyramid showed on the left. And we like to use this as a framework to help us map the emotional value drivers to these terms here. So with this pyramid, usually at the bottom with basic operations, that's more the basic needs that are covered. And as we move up to the top of the pyramid, those are more so the needs that are around the self. So if we use some examples of basic operations, that could be things like business process, effectiveness, efficiency. And as we move up to security, some examples may be things around safety and compliance. And in the middle of the pyramid, you can see there's community. So that could just be the sense of belonging. And here at Ibica, we've actually expanded this value driver of community into more terms and define that a bit more, but I'll save that for the next slide. So that's community value driver. And then as you can see at the top of the pyramid, there is self-esteem. So that could be confidence in one's job. And then at the top there, self-actualization. So that could be, your pride in the work or the vision of that you see yourself. And as you can notice on there, it says that as you move up the pyramid, it is true that pricing power does increase. So that's kind of why we like to frame it in this way in terms of emotional value. And I'll actually like to pause here just to note that, so this is just a very typical example of the organization of emotional value drivers, but there are cases in which this pyramid kind of shifts. So what I mean by this is that, say in some industries, maybe security is valued higher. So it's not this typical pyramid where the self is ranked higher in terms of pricing power. Or another good example is, say if the market is shocked, some of these terms some of these value drivers may have higher importance, and the pyramid may adjust in that sense. So for example, folks might be less focused on the self and could be valuing the community value driver a lot higher. And as I mentioned community value drivers, I'll just shift into the next category here, which is community. So as you can see with these terms, this is less of a hierarchy and I would say more of subtopics that are kind of interconnected and really play off each other. And just like the emotional value drivers, these are quite powerful and crucial to pricing work. So as I go through the list, I'll give a couple of examples too. So the first one being social impact or citizens impact. So we like to define this as more just like a general description of this idea of society as a whole and the aspect of community. And as we go down the list, you'll see that a handful of these categories are really connected and almost like strengthen each other in terms of value drivers. So I think that's quite interesting when we think about community value drivers. Here we have, the next one is health and well-being. So that could just be, fostering good health, and that could be mental health, physical health, and just general social well-being. And of course, we all know when COVID started, this was quite heavily, emphasized in a lot of the work and things that we saw in across all industries. So again, another key value driver here. We also have rights and freedoms. So this can just, the basic human rights that we see. And I think it's important to note that, across different countries, they may vary, but there's always that, strong drive for the basic human rights and basic freedoms there. Following this, we have security and safety. So this is just the general protection from harm, so things like natural disasters and such. And following this, we have society advancements. And this value driver is kind of geared towards the general improvement of these categories as a whole. So really moving forward to elevate these community value drivers. Following that is education. So, facilitating education, literacy, numeracy, and really what I think is quite interesting with education as a community value driver is that, it really ties to help elevate all these other value drivers listed here, and is quite a key factor in societal advancements as well. And lastly, on the list, we have environment and sustainability. So really just having a positive impact on the environment, things with sustainability, conservation, and such as examples. So just went down that list. I know it's a lot to intake, but hopefully folks can see that, by categorizing these community value drivers, we can see how powerful and important value actually is in terms of measurement as well. And moving on to the third and final category for value driver is economic. So a lot of times in our work, when we talk about value drivers, companies and folks like to jump straight to economic. They're thinking pricing, money, profit, expenses. Economic comes to mind, and it's really important concept to understand. So as I introduced economic value, what really goes hand in hand is EVE, or economic value estimation. So I know I talked a lot about defining these categories, but hopefully this will kind of break down how we're actually measuring it and giving that framework. So with EVE is actually developed by Tom Nagel, and he does a lot of work in pricing, specifically with strategic pricing, the core ideas as well as the framework around it. And if you're interested in some reading, he has this great book. I think all of us at Ibica have a copy. It's called Strategy and Tactic of Pricing. So if folks are interested, you can have a read there. And by using the diagram on the left, I'll try to explain EVE and his the value framework that he introduced. So with EVE, what you're doing is taking your positive value drivers and subtracting your negative value drivers, and that will give you your differentiation value. And just a note here that your normal price range will fall in between this differentiated value estimation. And just another note that I'll expand upon this in other slides, but when you are calculating your EVE, it is always relative to your next best alternative. So that's that dark green box there at the bottom of that diagram. And what might help is that to further explain this diagram as well as the value drivers is to go into the positive value drivers that I mentioned. So that kind of light green box on that diagram. So when we think of economic value drivers, there are 6 types. So the first one being increasing your revenue. So that could be, increasing market size, market share, improving your pipeline metrics. There is also decrease in operating expenses. So that could mean labor or utilities. There is also decreased operating capital. So that could be around inventory or accounts payable, accounts receivable balance. There is also decreased capital investment. So an example could be improving or getting more productivity from your existing assets. There's also the economic value driver of decreased risk. So, improving compliance or just aspects around financial risk as well. And lastly, there is increasing options. So that could be benefit packages and the ability to scale and tailor those options. And just again, to mention that these positive value drivers are represented in that light green box, and again, are relative to the next best alternatives. And you would be subtracting your negative value drivers to calculate your differentiated value. And to move on to the next part of this diagram, as mentioned, the negative value drivers, specifically the negative economic value drivers. So some examples, or the best way to describe negative value drivers would be really your shortcomings or any unique costs. So with shortcomings, that could be in areas that you might underperform, areas where there's a gap in your solution or service. And in terms of unique costs, that they're represented perhaps in switching costs that are associated to your offer that are unique to your product or service. And as I mentioned, you always need to think of these positive and negative value drivers in comparison to the next best alternative. Because really, when you are looking at a product or service, you're always measuring against something. And products and services aren't observed in a vacuum. So you're always competing and comparing to what else is out there. And as I mentioned this, that's kind of where differentiation comes into play. So with EVE, we can see how why we care about differentiation. Again, that's looking at the diagram, that's where your normal price range would fall into. And to kind of help expand on differentiation, I'll introduce this diagram here. So what we're doing here is breaking down the customer needs, as well as looking at your offer, as well as the offer of your competitor / the alternative offer. And you can see in this diagram, any customer need that is not met by your offer or an alternative is potential to innovate. And anything that is not or we would call that as unmet need. But if we look at something that is, a customer need that is covered by your offer as well as alternative, that would be categorized as a commodity. So really, there isn't much pricing power here. This component is set by market forces, and they're just considered things like table stakes expected from the customer, and nothing too special there. But when it becomes really interesting is when we look at things that are, within a customer need, you offer it and your alternative does not offer it. And that is, again, your differentiation, what we are highlighting here. And what is really great is this is where your pricing power comes into play. But if we look at the flip side, so in something that is needed by the customer, you don't offer, but the alternatives do offer it in their solutions or services, this is the competitor's differentiation. So again, this ties into your shortcomings as well as what your offer lacks. And again, this is highlighting the reason why we're always comparing things to the next best alternative, because if we're tying this to the diagram on the left, the increase in negative value drivers you have, the less differentiation your offer has, which means your normal price range will decrease. And in turn, that lowers your pricing power. And of course, anything that your offer or the alternative that is not meeting a customer need, then that is really just irrelevant functionality. But hopefully this diagram helps break down the importance of differentiation, but also highlighting why we care so much about comparing our offer to the next best alternative. So I'll just shift gears here onto segmentation. And now that we've covered those categories of value drivers and differentiation, we can think about applying our knowledge of these value drivers and thinking about the next key component for pricing. So when we think of segmentation, a lot of folks like to jump to demographics in terms of segmentation, as it's one of the simple and common ways to segment a group of people. But then that really makes us think of, do firms of similar size or that are in the similar industry or even in the same location and geography, are they going to buy in the same way? And so what we can do here is look at a quick example of trying to segment by demographics or firmographics. So if we segment by demographics, here's just an outline of what a potential segmentation may look like. So this segment, they live in a castle, they're very wealthy, they're around the age of 73 years old, as well as they care about their family. So when we think about this segment and these particular demographics, we're thinking, okay, do they buy in the same way? Do they have similar habits? How do they perceive value? And hopefully folks here listening can have an image of what a typical buyer in this segment may be, and thinking, okay, how can this segment come into play? But we can also see in this next slide that when we see this segment that, demographics often fail, as Ozzy Osbourne, as well as Prince Charles, would fall into the same segmentation if we're caring so much about demographics. And if we look at these two gentlemen, they might have very, very different buying habits, as well as preferences and especially values. And I think a lot of us might argue belong in very different segments. So this is an example of why segmenting on demographics often fail. They really narrow the window in terms of segmentation and can possibly lead us astray when we're thinking about pricing and marketing. So again, just to wrap that up, it really doesn't capture the full picture of buyers, and it's definitely not solid means for segmentation. So hopefully this example helps nail in that point there of why demographics often fail, but that might ask, okay, then how do we do segmentation? And you might have guessed it, we've been talking about value this whole presentation. So that's really our best practice and what we like to do at Ibica. So instead of relying on demographics, it's really critical that our segmentation and your segmentation incorporates the value drivers that we covered today. And really that's the best way to create your segments, as basing it off of their emotional, community, and economic value drivers. Because by using these categories, it will create a better picture of your buyers. And in the end, you can deliver more value to these segments if you can understand their market and their value drivers. So I can give an example. So in that table there, that's just an example of how you can help identify and almost map out the value drivers using the categories we covered today. And you can map it to, for example, like type of buyer or typical roles that you may see. And by organizing it in these tables and categories, you can start to build your segments and see patterns that you might have in the market. And this is really key for marketing, as we've kind of mentioned. That really is the starting point when we think about pricing. As mentioned before, really the goal is to connect these similar customers into these segments so that we can simplify these really key processes. So the processes of marketing, sales, support, and pricing. And since these customers in the segments should behave in similar ways, which means they'll respond to very similar value propositions when it comes to marketing and sales. And again, this is all based off of identifying their value drivers in those categories and creating that segmentation. And just to wrap up on the segmentation piece with these 3 points. So if we're highlighting what good segmentation looks like and what it will entail, it will mean that companies and customers in segments will buy in the same way. They will get value in the same way. And what's really nice is that they'll also act as reference for each other. So hopefully now we can understand the importance of segmentation and how value and differentiation is really foundational for all these processes. What we'll do is in the next section, we'll use the appropriate pricing strategies and talk a little bit about models in the pricing core concepts.
Thank you, Jesse. So now that we have gone over the core concepts around value, let's connect value to pricing. And as Jesse has covered in depth, value drivers are how a customer gets value, emotional, community, and economic. And each category is unique. It's a powerful and an important lens by which to segment your market and key input into your pricing model. So the value drivers, the economic, emotional, and community value drivers, and specifically when we talk about value metrics, the economic value drivers, they determine the value metric. And what we mean by the value metric is the unit of consumption by which a buyer gets value. For example, if we were to take the example of purchasing gas, it's kilometers per liter, right? How much mileage you can get out of 1 liter of gas. So that is an example of a value metric. The pricing metric then should track the value metric. And what the pricing metric is the unit of consumption by which the customer pays. Again, if you take the example of purchasing gas, it is dollars per liter. So the value metric is mileage you get per liter, and the value metric is the unit by which the customer pays, which is dollars per liter. Next slide, please. So the pricing metric should track the value metric, and linking these two metrics is key. So to reiterate, the value metric is how the user gets value, while the pricing metric is how you charge your customers. But now if we expand this diagram, you can see how the metrics, the value metric and the pricing metric, feed into the larger structure below. Everything in value-based pricing is linked back to value drivers. And properly assigning these value drive metrics and pricing metrics is a crucial step in pricing. So the market segmentation that Jesse has just covered, value-based market segmentation, that is, informs the value drivers, how the customer derives value. The value drivers determine the value metric, the unit by which they derive value. The pricing metric tracks the value metric, so the unit by which the customer will pay. And the pricing metrics are also used to design the pricing model, which is the structure of how you price for each target segment. And we get to the target segments again from the value-based market segmentation. So let's double click on pricing models. Next slide, please. In general terms, a pricing model is the design of pricing metrics, fencing, and packaging. Packaging is the functions and functionalities that you include in an offer. So packages are designed or should be designed specifically for specific target segments. So you don't need to include everything and provide all functions to all segments, and you shouldn't, in fact, right? So what goes into the pricing model? What is priced? The features and functionalities that you're pricing for, the unit by which you're pricing, the fences. What is it that is guiding buyers to the right offer? So fences are what guides a potential customer to the offer that best suits them. Value drivers that are not used as pricing metrics can sometimes be very effective fences, and we can give some examples of that a little bit later in the presentation. But just offhand, quickly, some examples of fences would be specific functionality that you do not offer for each segment, volume restrictions, role restrictions, and so on. Guide rails are also a part of the pricing model design. Guide rails are the range within which you want to price, as well as discounting policies. Again, you would also have to think about, is there going to be a tiered offer? What are the functions of the tiers? For example, if you have a premium tier, right? Is it the target tier, or is it just meant to serve as a framing for a lower tier, which is your target tier, and to make that tier look attractive relative to a really highly priced tier? So essentially, the goal here is to design packages and tiers for segments where you can maximize on the differentiated value that you create for them, increase their willingness to pay, and then capture through your pricing a fair share of the value that you create for them. Next slide, please, Jesse. So Pricing can support many different goals, but it can't do everything at the same time. You cannot optimize for everything. And good pricing requires clear alignment on what that goal is. Good pricing should typically be focused on achieving one goal. And the first step is to clarify with the key stakeholders what these pricing goals are. So let me give you some examples of pricing goals. There are category goals, right? For instance, defining value and pricing for a new category or expanding on an existing category, right? So either category growth or category share, getting a bigger share of the pie on an existing category. It could also be P&L goals like driving volume, growing top line revenue, improving gross profit, optimizing cash flow. It could also be unit economic goals. So improving the lifetime value of a customer, reducing churn, reducing customer acquisition costs. So it's very important to take the time really to get stakeholder alignment on what the key pricing goal is. You have to take a longer term view and not rather than just focusing on the immediate term, because oftentimes we come across companies where whose pricing is a frozen accident, right? And the pricing that they inherited or it just somehow came into existence is not aligned with their organization goals, and it's really not helping them achieve these goals. So once you have an established pricing or once you have an existing pricing, it is much more difficult to course correct, as it may erode the perception of consistency and transparency with existing customers. So it's really important to take the time and get key stakeholder alignment on what you're looking to optimize through your value-based pricing. Next slide, please. So I would like to quickly cover the three basic pricing strategies. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this. So the first is skimming or premium. So charging the maximum price that your pricing power allows. And often this is done in order to invest heavily in continuing innovation and value creation for the customers. As I said before, the ongoing value cycle and the spokes that we covered early on in this presentation. The second pricing strategy is market following, where you price relative to a market leader, an existing incumbent in the market. And the third is penetration, where you price as low as possible to grow the overall market or to increase the category share. So get a bigger share of an existing pie. Next slide, please. I'd also like to cover some pricing methods. So there's cost plus pricing, and almost everyone is familiar with this. So how it works is you measure your cost to serve and apply a desired rate of return. So some of the challenges with that is that this is very much susceptible to competitive pressure and or customer buying power. So it really does take the value of the pricing power away from you, and it is more so about the customer's buying power. Then there's market following, where you follow the competitor's pricing and match and or underprice the competitor's price. Again, this leads to price wars, commoditization, and it's often very transactional. There's also input-based pricing, where the pricing is tied to an external variable like an interest rate or energy prices. But again, there is quite a bit of lack of predictability both on the buyer side as well as you as a seller. And of course, there's value-based pricing, and we are big proponents of it. So this price is based on capturing a portion of the economic value created for the customer. It enables premium pricing, so it gives you pricing power. But also, one of the challenges with it is that it requires a deep understanding of the customer business and upfront investment. And that's where the value-based market segmentation, the time to get aligned on those pricing goals comes in. Next slide, please. There are also a number of emerging pricing models, dynamic pricing, which is not so much emerging, but it is getting more use in different sectors now outside of airline pricing that we are also familiar with. So dynamic pricing is where algorithms adjust pricing based on real time demand and capacity. But of course, it requires investment into sophisticated pricing management software. There's also usage-based pricing, where the pricing is directly tied to consumption. For a successful product-led growth strategies, value, price, and usage metrics need to align. So you need to make sure that how the usage-based pricing is designed doesn't actually discourage use and adoption of the solution. And also with usage-based pricing, there is an element of unpredictability, and clients typically dislike unpredictable costs. There's also one more emerging pricing method, which is outcomes-based, where pricing is part dependent on the achievement of a specific client outcome. Again, it's a bit complex, where there's contractual complexity and, of course, other extraneous factors. So as we go over the pricing strategies and the pricing methods, pricing in itself can be an innovation, right? So a good example of that is Rolls-Royce's power by the hour pricing. So in this example, Rolls-Royce changed their pricing model in the early 1960s, I believe, to allow airlines to lease their jet engines and pay only by the number of hours the engine was in operation, rather than having to buy the engines outright, right? So for airlines, the engine is revenue generating only during the hours that it is in operation. So the value metric is hours of operation for the engines for when they're revenue generating. And by aligning their pricing, so Rolls-Royce aligning their pricing to the number of hours the engine was in operation, Rolls-Royce essentially created a very successful pricing model that transformed the industry. They were also not only just aligning the value metric, but the pricing metric here, but you will also notice that they were able to tap into the emotional value drivers by enabling risk sharing between the buyer and the seller, right? And also thereby reducing the burden of maintenance from the airlines to Rolls-Royce themselves. Next slide, please. So when we talk about technology, many of you may be familiar with Moore's technology adoption lifecycle model that tracks the adoption of a product or innovation from the innovator to early adopters to early majority, late majority, and finally laggards. And pricing has important transition points across the technology adoption cycle. The key thing to remember about technology adoption is that the buyer's reasons for buying can change across the life cycle. And as the reasons to buy change, so do the value drivers that matters, as well as their willingness to pay. So you have to think about the value and use it to shape your pricing strategy as your buyer's motivation changes. You have to understand these transitions and be honest about where your product or technology actually is within this life cycle. Next slide, please. So at the beginning they're innovators, right? Innovators are buying because something is new, and they're not all that really concerned with business value. They tend to have a very low willingness to pay and are not really moved by economic arguments. However, they do influence the early adopters. Now, early adopters are buying to get a unique competitive advantage. Early adopters are willing to pay a premium for competitive advantage as well. So you generally have to know an early adopter's business well to win them over and tailor the solution to their unique needs, but they are willing to pay a premium price for that. Next slide, please. Companies then that are lucky enough to have crossed the chasm move on to early majority. And in early majority, you come across the bowling alley buyers. And bowling alley buyers are buying to stay competitive within their own market. So they're verticals, right? They care most about their direct competitors and will buy if they see their competitors buying. They respond to value drivers that are directly applicable to the mechanics of their own business. And their willingness to pay is generally lower than early adopters. So for tornado buyers, this is when the verticals start referencing each other. So tornado buyers see the solution as a cost of doing business. And as it is a cost, they're even more price sensitive than the bowling alley buyers. But on the flip side, so the positive side, there is a lot more of them. And at this point in time, failing to flip from vertical value drivers that are specific to industry verticals to horizontal value drivers that span across verticals and adjusting pricing accordingly, so flipping from the vertical to the horizontal, is one of the main reasons companies may get pushed out of the tornado markets. And but it's also important to remember that very few companies do survive the transition from bowling to tornado. So for tornado buyers, this is where the value drivers tend to start becoming more generic, as generic as possible, and so will the marketing messages. Next slide, please. So mainstream, this is when solutions start to proliferate. You start getting highly differentiated solutions for specific markets. And without differentiation, commodity pricing will start to prevail. So you have to maintain position by targeting very tight niches. Next slide, please. So I don't believe we have covered late majority here, but I will just quickly touch on it. Late majority buyers tend to have a good understanding of the value of the solution, and the value drivers are very well known, tested, and approved. Laggards buy solutions that they are already very familiar with and already have. And also at the tail end of the adoption life cycle, legacy solutions can sometimes are able to charge a premium because there's no support available as everyone is starting to get out of the market. So pricing coaches and pricing strategists need good early warning systems to help them predict when a market will go through these transition points from early life to end of life, starting with the innovators all the way to the laggards. Pushing for horizontal value drivers or mass market too early can cause a company to stall out and reduce their pricing power, or staying with them too long may also be a recipe for failure. So it's really, really important to be able to predict when a market will go through these transition points and plan accordingly. Next slide, please. So pricing matters to investors. Good value-based pricing is a critical lever you have to have in your arsenal. And pricing matters to investors. If you follow a value-based methodology, you're putting yourself in a better position to attract investors. And when we talk about value-based methodology, it starts off with understanding value and market segmentation. And market segmentation demonstrates your understanding of your market, patterns, needs, attitudes, behaviors, identify customers who value your differentiation and the value that they will receive, and it underpins the calculation of the market size, which is so important. Customer targeting, another part of the methodology, shows that you've identified your most attractive segment, you've prioritized your marketing investment, financial and otherwise, so effort-wise as well, and understanding of your customer's buying process. Next slide, please. Understanding of your unique and differentiated value proposition. Again, this takes a little bit of time and market research, but determines your ability to realize your potential earning. And again, just to reiterate, it is always relative to the next best competitive alternative. And investors want to know that you have done your competitive analysis. Again, next bit in the methodology is market sizing. It provides an indication of your potential earnings. Does your TAM, SAM, SOM, so again, the total addressable market, serviceable addressable market, and serviceable obtainable market, does it justify your valuation? Customer traction, it is quantified evidence of market demand, validation that the value is being created, is being documented. Again, there is pricing optimization. The correct pricing metric helps you monitor your price acceptance, guide behavior across tiers, and be better prepared for competitive positioning. And pricing is a key lever, as we said, to win higher profits, revenue, or market share, all things that investors are very, very interested in. Next slide, please. And to just wrap it up and bring it all back to our value cycle where we began, create and capture value through value-based pricing, and capture a fair share of that value that you create. Create and capture value not only for your customers, but also your investors. And price such that the value cycle continues and you can continue to invest in value creation and ongoing value capture for all. And with that, it brings us to the end of our presentation. And I know there has been a number of comments, which I will have a quick look at, but I will open the floor up for discussion. And Stephen, if you could join us, that would be great.
All right. So if you want to ask your question yourself, you can use the hand thing, the put up your hand thing, and I can unmute you, or you can put your questions into the chat. I urge you to take advantage of this opportunity because we have 3 pricing experts here who will answer, and you don't always get that. And I personally learn a lot from Q&As, whether I ask the question or not. So, okay, Tim wants to have a question. So Tim, I think you can unmute here. Go ahead.
Yes, I did. I'm not sure if you can see me. So emotional pricing is a big thing for us. We are promoting open scientific data, and so we're helping companies fulfill that. So one of their mandates. To what extent? I suppose I was wondering about a percentage. Like, is economic value typically like 90% of the pricing process, and emotional value 10% on top of that, or can emotional value really exceed even the economic value aspect of pricing?
Rashak and Jesse, would you mind if I jump in on that?
Yep, go
By
ahead.
all means, Stephen, and just
early for a call, but I'll stick on for a couple minutes.
Yeah.
And
so
just quickly, sorry, Angie, would you mind pinning Stephen?
pinning, that sounds painful.
Yes.
Tim,
Go ahead.
that's super interesting. I don't think you can give a hard and fast rule of the relative importance of emotional versus community versus economic. Clearly, in B2B, you must have differentiated economic value. But I would also say you must have emotional value, and the higher you can go on Maslow's pyramid, the more pricing power you're going to have. And if there's no emotional appeal, someone who's figured out how to deliver that emotional value is going to win the sale, not you. However, what you're describing, so we're doing some very interesting work right now in a similar sort of area. We're actually doing it with a major nonprofit. And I'll have to go back and reread my NDA, so I'm going to put this in general terms. So what they are doing is they are simplifying a complex regulatory process globally, which is of incredible importance both to the regulators, the people whose things are regulated, and to the global, everyone in the world. So it has tremendous, it has direct economic value. It also has compelling emotional value, but it also has very important community value. What you were describing, if I understood it correctly, has a similar kind of dynamic. Scientists want to get their data out. It's a huge community value. So I think that, in your case, the community value drivers are every bit as important to explore as the emotional and the economic.
All right.
And I'd like to learn more about your platform.
Okay. Thank you, Tim.
Yes, I'll send you a message.
Great. Okay. I see Greg's hand is up. Hey, Greg. Nice to see you.
Hey, thanks, Angie. For those of us who are new at the kind of competitive analysis piece, any tips on identifying your next best alternative?
Yeah. So, sorry, Rashak, I should let you answer these. I'll just answer this one. You can answer the next one.
Go ahead, Stephen. All good.
So the best way to do this is to study your customers and talk to your customers or prospective customers, and they will tell you. That's really the only reliable way. You will often find that for a lot of, and again, we work mostly in B2B, one of the most common alternatives is spreadsheets and macros and in-house databases is frequently the next best competitive alternative. If you're selling to large enterprise, it used to be the case that don't worry, our IT team will do it. That has been diminishing rapidly over the last 5 years as cloud solutions have gotten better adoption. But it still happens. And then the third alternative that many of you will encounter, especially in B2B, is FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, being spread by major platform providers. So those of you who can remember back into the time when Microsoft was dominant, Microsoft would frequently say, yes, don't worry, we're going to do that. That's on our roadmap. And whether it actually was on their roadmap or they'd ever get around to doing it, that was often enough to quash competition. So in many cases, those are going to be the competitive alternatives, but not always. Sometimes there's a way of cobbling together existing applications. Sometimes there's a direct competitive alternative. This is where thinking in terms of value drivers is really important. But anyway, I'm getting past the question of a competitive alternative, so I'll stop.
I just wanted to add in that sometimes the next best competitive, it's not just the next best competitive alternative, it is the next best alternative, which might also just be status quo. Again, that is where communicating the differentiated economic, emotional, community value becomes so important to just get them to think outside of the status quo. So
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Greg. Anyone else have any questions? Let's see, cheering or clapping hands. And that you can ask in the chat or ask live, up to you. Oh, I see a hand here. BK.
Hi, good evening.
Yeah.
It's good evening for me from India. My question is, I'm still in the research stage for my startup and I'm talking to my prospective customers. So how do I arrive at a differential value proposition for my startup before I do launch it?
Chaka, do you want to answer that, or?
go ahead, Stephen.
Okay. So first of all, it's fantastic that you're thinking about these problems this early. So, congratulations on that. Many people only start thinking about these issues once they've already developed lots of code. So you're doing the right thing. It's very much, a prototyping and hypothesis approach. So you say, if I could do this, if my application could do this, would it create value in the following ways? So there's nothing wrong with creating a hypothetical value model and getting people to discuss it with you. Because the first thing that you want to do is, so with a value model has two pieces. It has equations, and I'm talking about the economic part now. It has equations and it has variables. And you have to get the equations right. And the only way you can know you have the equations right is by talking to customers. Second is the variables will be wrong. There's absolutely no way you will ever get the variables right. And even if by some miracle you did, when you introduce your product to the market, you will change the market dynamics and the variables will change again.
I see.
So the variables don't have to be right, but they have to be reasonable. So if you go and say with something that is clearly bullshit or is designed to make you look good, then you lose trust. Ibica is all about value-based pricing, as Jesse and Rashaka explained, and value-based pricing is based on trust. So if you cannot develop a relationship of trust with your customers, you can't do value-based pricing. All
right, Stephen. Thank you so much.
So go ahead and build your value model and test it.
Thanks a lot.
Great. Hussein, you're next.
Thank you. The reason I'm laughing is that I kept doing the clapping hands and someone from my team said like, you're just clapping hands, you're not raising your hand. So thank you. So my question is, our product is a D2C product, and it's geared towards children and their parents for mental health and mindfulness and their imagination. We've been working on it for 2 years. I've been thinking about pricing with my team for 2 years. We think we know where we're going to go with. What if, like, good chance that we're wrong. What if we're wrong? Like, we did get, like, responses from parents. We're running a beta with the school. But at the end of the day, what if we're wrong with the pricing? How quick should we be on pivoting from price the same way that we pivoted from features and things like that? Or should we stick with it? Should we reduce pricing? What's, like, that's like the biggest fear I have after, 2 years. I'm just thinking, like, there's a chance that we will be wrong. High chance, given the probabilities of it.
I would say there's a 100% chance that you're wrong, and that's fine. Pricing is never right. But what's important is it be directionally right and that you have a method in place to improve it. So in many ways, that's easier with B2B than it is with B2C. With B2C, and especially in the space you're in, you are primarily pricing for community and for emotional value drivers. So I would model that out, though, and be very clear what you believe the community and emotional value drivers are and how you are serving them. And when you think about price, many people think that price is a number, that it's the number that goes on the price tag. But a far more important question is, what are you going to put the price tag on? There are many different things that you can price. Which ones should you be pricing? So I would spend most of my time worrying about what does the price tag go on, and I would spend almost no time worrying about what number goes on the price tag. It's easy to change the number. The other thing I would say that this gets into your go-to-market strategy, but a general rule of thumb is it's easier to lower prices than it is to raise them. So I would, so for example, let's say that you're going to market with an incomplete product, which I hope you are. You can say the price is $100, but we are giving you an early adopter discount. And that early adopter discount probably goes away after a period of time. But it lets you adjust for the the fact that you don't have a complete product when you initially go to market. Did that help?
Absolutely. We are putting like a value into when the subscription part is launched, and it makes total sense in terms of navigating it this way. It's really helpful, and I really appreciate that, especially what to price, not what the price would be, because again, like, it's really different story to tell depending on the physical book, the app, the subscription, and that's very helpful. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, Lori. Hi, nice to see you.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Hi. I have actually, you've kind of answered my question when you were asking, but we're going to launch a pilot of something. How do you price a pilot?
So I'm going to take a step back and
Okay.
say the first thing you should do is build your value model, and that your pilot should be used to gather the data that you need to either evolve or to prove your value model.
Okay.
So that's the first thing. Second is how you price a pilot depends on who you're selling it to. So remember when Rashaka and Jesse were going through Jeffrey Moore's technology adoption cycle?
Yeah.
So the thing to understand there is that innovators hate paying money. So if you're selling to innovators, it will be very difficult to get them to pay you anything. Early adopters are happy to pay money, and they are uncomfortable if they are not paying money, and they are willing to pay a premium to get what they need and to be ahead of the market. So, and then bowling alley or early Main Street or whatever you want to call it, tend to be they're very conscious buyers. They want to pay a fair price, but they also want to pay the price that other people that are getting similar value are being paid. So who is your pilot targeted at? Is it targeted at innovators, early adopters, or early Main Street?
So we actually, we're a marketplace. So we actually have two, and we connect businesses with charities. And specifically, what we're piloting is a sign up for individual employees to customize how they want to be giving, and we basically act like a charity concierge for these individual employees. So we have businesses interested who have employee volunteer programs.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah, so, but we're also charging on the charity side as well. And
okay, so I think again, the first thing, so two-sided markets are great fun. Rashaka's working on a two-sided market right now, and they have a separate set of challenges. We almost need to do a different presentation for people doing two-sided markets. The first thing I would do if I were you is I would actually build the interaction model for each side of the market and show how value exchanges hands.
okay, we just did that. We just started getting that out there and seeing and getting feedback on kind of what that looks like and the value and what they're,
yeah. The problem with the markets, right? So marketplaces are incredibly powerful business models, but they're also hard to get started. So once you get them started, they are really powerful. If you are competing with someone who is running a market and you are not, you've lost.
Okay.
That wasn't for you. That was for all the other people out there who are, might see their businesses consumed by a marketplace. So it's great that you're doing that. And the thing that you have to really deal with is the sort of marketplaces are only valuable if there are people on both sides.
right. So that's the other. So yes.
So that's actually the first thing you need to solve for, is getting a critical mass on both sides. So I think about the problem differently when it comes to two-sided or multi-sided market platforms. Happy to have a deeper conversation with you about it if you ping one of us by email or on LinkedIn.
That's awesome.
But I think to go through the whole thing now, we'd spend another couple of hours.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Great, thank you, Laurie. I think Pifa had a question, and then we'll go to Alexander's question. Pifa, I hope I'm saying your name right. Do you want to unmute? Oh, Pifa's asking it in the chat.
Okay.
If you can see it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so Pifa, I think the answer is it's sort of what we said earlier. Set the price at the full value that you expect to be able to deliver, and then give an early adopter discount that automatically goes away as you layer in additional value. So it's important to set, because another really important thing about pricing, right, is you're setting a frame of reference. And once you set a frame of reference in one place, it's incredibly hard to move it. So you need to, and this is one of the high risks, right, when introducing new things to the market. So you need to set the frame of reference in the proper place. But you also need to recognize that you are not providing your full value. And we didn't discuss risk very much here, but your buyers are accepting a risk in buying from an early stage company. So there's an implicit risk discount as well. So you have to do two things. You have to set the frame where it should be, and maybe it's down here. I'm not saying it's always really high, but you need to frame the price where it should be once you're providing the full value. And then you also need to acknowledge that you don't yet provide that value, and that there's risk in doing business with you. So for those reasons, you first set the price and then you provide the early adopter discount. But you don't go into the market and say, well, actually, we don't really do that much yet, so I'm going to set the price down here. And then as you add more and more functionality, you'll find it's very difficult to pull the price back up. Did that answer your question?
Hopefully. If not, you can add a follow-up in the chat. There's another question from Alexander just in front of that one. When you speak about the value model, do you mean the value proposition canvas? That's from Alexander.
No, we do not. So value model is, so there's the economic value model, and it's basically a set of equations for the 6 types of value drivers that Rashaka went through. And it's an equation with a set of variables. Or it's a set of equations with the variables in the equations. So it's very different from the canvas. The canvas is a useful tool, but it does not help you actually estimate or document value.
Okay, great. Okay, Wei, you are next if you want to unmute.
Hi, Stephen. So we're trying to transition from a cost plus pricing model into a value-based pricing model in a two-sided marketplace. We provide transportation warehousing services, and we're adding project management into the mix. What are some of the strategies when you're trying to shift that frame of reference? Because we know that frame of reference is very difficult to change. How would one go about shifting that when they're adding a value add into what they sell and how they price it?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. So what you're talking about is one of the most challenging things that you're going to do in business, which is transitioning a pricing model. So there are a number of things that you need to do. Again, this is one of those longer conversations that we're happy to have offline with you. But the first thing is be transparent. So explain to your customers what you're doing, why you're doing it, and why it is in their interest. Second, is to make the change when you are adding some important new functionality. And it sounds like that's what you're doing. So that's great. So you're setting the groundwork right. You're adding important new functionality, and you're realigning your pricing model at the same time, so that the pricing reflects the value of the functionality. Transparency and fairness, as Rashaka and Jesse talked about, is super important. So you talk about this early with key customers. You get their feedback, understanding, and buy-in. You show them that, in fact, this is in their interest. You're not just doing, if you ever set up pricing so that it's a zero-sum game, do you know that concept, a zero-sum game from game theory? If I win, you lose, that's a zero-sum game. If your pricing is designed as a zero-sum game, you're designing it to fail. So you have to work out how your pricing and your value is a positive sum game, and how the transition in the pricing model is in both your interest and in your customer's interest. So this is going to be different for every company, but that's the thinking that you need to do. So make it a positive sum game, be transparent, talk about it early, get customer buy-in. One of the best ways to get customer buy-in, by the way, is by building a value model, and do it when you are introducing, do it at a natural transition point in business. If you're not changing anything, it's really hard to just change pricing. It can be okay, especially to switch from cost plus to value based.
Okay, great. I think Wes, your video must have frozen, but we're recording, so hopefully we'll catch that.
I could just jump in,
yeah, go ahead.
Stephen, since you have mentioned value model a number of times, there is a follow-up question in chat about value models and what it means exactly, and if it is similar to a value proposition canvas. If you could touch on that.
Yeah, I think I just answered that, didn't I? What would be great though is, Rashaka, do you have a value model that you can pop up on screen? Preferably not one where you're breaking some customer's proprietary information.
Yes. While you're looking for that, I will say last call for questions. We've got maybe a few more minutes left. Actually, Carlos has a question here. Maybe you can address it. That gives Rashaka some time to find that. Yeah, it's in the chat.
Oh, wow. Another big question, free. Okay, well, the first thing is if you're in B2B today, you are most likely going to need to figure out how to provide some form of free, especially if you're executing on a product-led growth model. There are many different flavors of free. So free means different thing. There are different ways to do it. So one situation is where having people in the community, having free users creates additional value for paying users. So for example, in LinkedIn, I'm a paying user, and all you people that are doing lots of great stuff on LinkedIn for free are creating additional value for me, so I'm happy to pay. So that's one situation. Another situation is trial. And there are different ways of structuring trials. You have to have boundaries, but at the same time, the trial has to demonstrate value, which is not always easy. The design of the free part of your offer is actually one of the harder things you're going to do and requires lots of thought. So make sure that the free trial provides value, but that there are ways of gating that value, and that there are ways of helping people to transfer the value they've accumulated in the free version or the free trial, so that when they start paying you, they get far more value. So and here's a third example that we ran into recently. Some solutions have a long time to value, and it can often make sense to cover that time to value period when not much value is being created with a free offer. And then when you switch to the paid offer, you can really shorten time to value. So again, this is one of those really big questions. I'll just say for many people, the free trial is an afterthought, but it should not be. It's an absolutely foundational part of a B2B business today. A/B testing with free trials depends on what you're trying to A/B test. The free part is a great way to place to do testing different packaging, testing different configurations, testing different service models. Generally, we do not recommend A/B testing. You have to be really careful when you're A/B testing pricing. So the free version is a good place to introduce things, to do testing and configuration testing. Generally speaking, A/B testing is not a great place to do, a great thing to do with pricing. And remember that one of the tenets of pricing is it needs to be fair, transparent, and consistent. And A/B testing is neither transparent nor consistent. So there are ways to do it. There are times when it makes sense, but you have to be cautious. But yeah, for the whole free trial thing is a big, difficult question. And don't underestimate it. Lots of people say, oh, we've got our product, we've got our packaging, we've got our pricing model. We need a free version.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Okay, a couple more minutes. Rashaka, did you find anything to share? Awesome.
Yes, I think I haven't found any spreadsheets, but we do have a demo version in our value pricing dashboard, Stephen, where we have a
Yeah.
demo value model built out. So let me see if I can share my screen. Don't ask me the details because I do not know what the details are of this, but we can give you a general idea of how it is that we approach designing a value model. So what you're looking, am I sharing my screen? Are you looking at the dashboard? So what you are looking at right now is the value pricing dashboard, which is a SaaS application that we have where, we will design a pricing model here on the very right. And we also design the value model that goes with it and puts the pricing in the context of the value created. And just quickly, if you look at the dashboard, what it does is the value model, in essence, will give you the total value that you will create for a customer or prospect and put it in the context of the price that you're charging and say, hey, you are fairly now capturing 38% of the value created through price. So how do we get to this total value created? That is the value model. Sorry, let me just move this a little bit. Okay, so what the value model starts off with is, as Jesse went over, the economic value driver categories, revenue, OPEX, risk, all of those things. So what we have here is the revenue impact. You would have the operating cost impact, and in this case, risk impacts, quantifying, how you're reducing risk for this fictional customer with the fictional product here. And the value model then goes in and say, hey, these are the revenue value drivers, economic value drivers. These are certain ways, we are improving revenues for you because, you were losing X dollars of revenue with your previous solution. And this solution, is negating that. So current estimated lost revenue. So when we have that, we will put in a formula. As Stephen said, it starts with the equation. So the equation has to be correct. You hypothesize the equation and it has to be correct. And you then put in estimates or guesstimates in certain instance of what these inputs are. And again, as Stephen said, in answering one of the previous questions, it's through again, bringing this up with prospects and clients that you do get from guesstimates to proper estimates, but you will always start off with figures that are guesstimates and sometimes quite off base, but you just want to make sure that you are not putting in numbers that, make you look more favorable to a customer. So yeah, so revenue impacts, we would put in different value driver categories here. So the value drivers, and we will put in equations to estimate how and quantify the economic value that you create for a prospect or a customer. So we have different ways of doing that. So we have the revenue impacts categorized there, the economic value drivers. We have the operating costs, again, different ways that this fictional solution is creating value for the fictional customer. So reduction in electricity costs from better management. We will come up with a formula that is an integral part of designing the value model, the equations, and then putting in estimates of the value to quantify the economic value. We would go ahead and do that for all the different 6 value driver categories that Jesse covered. So this, in essence, is the value model.
Yeah, so that's what a value model looks like. Clearly you can do these in spreadsheets. And in fact, we often build first rough draft in a spreadsheet and test it. And part of what Ibica does is provide value pricing dashboards that connect the value model and the pricing model so that you can track value over the customer journey. Is a core part of our business.
Awesome. Okay, well, thanks for sharing that overview. And thanks to Jesse and Rashaka for taking us through the materials. Stephen, always appreciate the Q&A support and answering everyone's questions. We are out of time. Sorry, Jordan. But I think we've got Rashaka and Stephen have their email addresses in there. So hopefully you can send them an email. Otherwise, I'll say, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, and we are really easy to find on LinkedIn.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate that. I just put a link in the chat. That's where we store all the PowerPoint decks and the videos for seminars like this. So the PowerPoint deck's already there. Just scroll down to the seminar and then the video will be up tomorrow. Otherwise, it's 2 o'clock, so we'll end here. Don't forget, if you want to enter the competition, Monday's the deadline. Thank you again, Stephen, Rashaka, and Jesse, of course, as well. And we'll see you, all you companies, next week. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you
Okay.
for your time. Bye, everyone.
Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thanks
Luck,
again.
everyone.